Well, hi everybody. Welcome. My name is Adam Burden. I'm with Accenture, and I'm our Chief Software Engineer. It's actually a new title I've gotten recently, and I think it's probably the coolest title in Accenture, actually. I like it. I've been with Accenture for 27 years, and I run a group called our Engineering Services Practice. So that's all of our custom development, all of our kind of emerging technology areas like blockchain, data-driven practices, analytics. It also includes groups that are doing software architecture, of course. So it's a pretty big part of our business. And one of the things that we also do in there is platform engineering work, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And it's something that we see a lot of clients of Accenture expressing a great deal of interest in as they look to evolve their businesses to become more digital enterprises. During the course of the discussion, I'm going to be joined by Tani Krefeld. Tani is one of our practitioners out in the line, and she's going to share with you and kind of bring to life the example of becoming a more platform business. As one of the examples from a TV industry, and it's a project we've recently completed, and it's got quite a bit of interesting results from it that I think will be very educational for the folks here. So with that, let's go ahead and just get started. One of the things that inspires a lot of our clients to engage with Accenture is they're looking at where their next era of business growth is going to come from. And they also are in a difficult spot as well. They see that they have technology change happening around them at an unbelievable pace. In fact, one of the things that I like to say about that type of challenge or scenario that they're in is that they have, that we'll actually never see the pace of technology change as slow again as it is today. Now, that's a pretty daunting thing for any of them to absorb, and they're looking for ways in which they can maybe ride some of those technology waves rather than be taken over by them rather. And it's really never been easier for a competitor or an adjacent business, perhaps in another industry, to be able to introduce a product or service for Accenture's clients that could really disrupt them. We actually see this happen quite a bit because of what we call the democratization of technology, and it's actually one of the great things that cloud service providers, cloud platforms like AWS have actually made happen for us in the industry, and probably for many of you in the room, you've seen this around you, where a disruptive entity can come into a well-established business that may be decades or even 100 years old, and very quickly actually disrupt them, and that because they have access to a reasonably costed cloud service, compute services, low-cost storage, and network, it's much easier than it ever has been before for them to actually introduce new products and services that perhaps would have been, the territory or domain of much larger enterprises exclusively in the past. So they're looking; these enterprises are looking to say, well, how do we actually thrive in this period of constant change? And the difficult complexity is around us with all these changes that are happening. How do we actually thrive in that period? And our advice to them is, first of all, you can't take your eye off the ball of your core business. That is the heart of your profits and others. It's the thing that's going to keep your business afloat. So what you need to do is to strike a balance between transforming the core and what we call pivoting to the new. Now we're being very, we're really kind of distilling this down into a couple of key points. But when we're developing a strategy for a client who's struggling in this environment, and believe me, many of the larger enterprises in the world encounter these types of difficulties every day, it really kind of boils down to kind of these two areas of transforming the core and pivoting the new. And when they're transforming the core, it's not just about transforming the core of their infrastructure or their network core or other things. It's actually looking at the core of their business. How do they make it actually more agile? And that might actually be introducing new ways of working. It might be doing things which are implementing new ways of cost avoidance. And I'm going to give you some examples of how we do that in a few minutes. But it's all about how do we maximize the profits from this, from our core business, and how do we continue to drive the revenue and the growth out of it, achieve cost avoidance, cost to serve reductions, et cetera. How do we do those things? And at the same time, we are becoming a more data-driven business. We're using information in new ways to actually guide our business, and we're driving and propelling new areas of growth from it as a result. And that's the part of pivoting to the new. Now, we see a lot of friction happen between these two things, and sometimes they actually conflict with each other. And I'll be honest, even in a company like Accenture, we even have this happen to ourselves a little bit, where we're starting up a new area or a new practice of our business, and it starts to have some friction with another area of a business. It's almost like we're cannibalizing the business. But the truth is that if you are going to be a business who's going to survive and thrive into tomorrow, you can't approach those kind of scenarios with fear. You can't be afraid that your new product line is going to cannibalize your old product line. You have to be thinking about how you're going to do that in balance with each other. And that's exactly what we mean by this, doing pivot to the new. At the same time, you're transforming the core and being able to strike the right balance with that. So let's take a look maybe about what we mean exactly by transforming the core and how you go about doing this. And this is a great way where we can really kind of bring in the elements of AWS and how AWS enables our clients to achieve these types of things. So obviously one of the things is around total cost of ownership. This is a tried and true technique. How do we move a lot of the infrastructure perhaps that a client has that is costing them quite a bit of money into cloud. So we're migrating, using migration tools and techniques to actually migrate servers there. But it doesn't end there. If all I'm looking at is the cloud era, the cloud environment as a lower cost data center, you're kind of missing the point. You're missing out on some of the opportunities that are available for you. Even if you're not going to go in and actually do major surgery on the application itself and maybe make it a more elastic application or turn it into some multi-tenant thing that you don't currently have, because again, you're trying to reduce the cost and optimize what's there. You still can do a lot because the cloud platform that you're on and the AWS services that are at your disposal will allow you to continue to drive down that cost and actually even create a bit more of a nimble enterprise. Think about the ability, to automate a lot of your infrastructure deployments, or think about the ability that you might have to do other things inside of your infrastructure layer, which might deploy test environments or other things much more rapidly than you've been able to do it in the past, because it's all available to you as a service. And by the way, I'm giving you some hints about how do you take this, how do you create a business case almost about doing this as well. Now, the second area of transforming the core is all about reducing your cost to serve. And here, absolutely, infrastructure as code and doing a heck of a lot of automation inside of your deployment activities, your infrastructure management activities, can give you a ton of benefit from that. And then, of course, you've got things like revenue cost avoidance, which are giving you almost a kind of a very differentiated way of reducing costs that weren't available to you on previous environments. In fact, I'll give you an example here of this, which was quite good. So if you look at the compliance side of things, this is actually a very expensive part of business operations for a number of our clients that we work with, where they're having to perhaps audit certain things, that let's say in the case of banking, like know your customer activities, or anti-money laundering practices. These are big, expensive functions to run in your enterprise. The more you can do to kind of take those out of manual processes and automate that, the better off you're actually going to be. And in fact, in the compliance processes for this, one of the things that we did when we migrated a good deal of the infrastructure with Capital One working on this is that we were able to actually automate a lot of the compliance processes they were running simply by instrumenting a lot of the infrastructure as code and the deployment processes to satisfy some of the audit requirements that were there. So that saved them a lot of money. And when you're looking at transforming the core, all of these things together, reducing the cost to serve, achieving revenue cost avoidance, driving down some of the total cost of ownership, it's giving you those cost savings so that you can actually free up investment dollars to be able to pivot to the new. And here what we're trying to do is we're trying to embrace the adoption of new ways of working, using cloud in different ways. And the real thing to kind of keep in mind here is that the difference here is a lot of times this is Greenfield stuff, right? So we're actually building brand new things, brand new products and services on AWS cloud. And we're trying to do it in very different ways than before. It's a difficult process sometimes, though, because a lot of times the business practices that are already in place, the way software development is done, the culture that's in place, the difference between dev and ops, as you guys, many of the folks in here I'm sure know very well, they actually are significant handicaps to being able to truly pivot to the new and kind of embrace the ability to do things in very different ways. I'll give you a good example. We were working with a bank, and by the way, I'm actually from Singapore, working at a bank in Singapore. And one of the first projects that they ever did that was cloud-enabled or a cloud-native application, the way that we constructed that particular application and the way that we went about building it was completely, full agile development, fully automated DevOps pipeline, and we wanted to be able to push a lot of the application changes that happened directly into production out of our DevOps pipeline. Well, you would have thought we'd committed heresy even suggesting that as an approach to some of the bank who had these very established processes, a highly conservative type of environment. And it wasn't until we kind of stepped back from that and started to explain to them, how you can use patterns like site reliability engineering approaches and others to actually create a level of resiliency that they'd never engineered into their software previously, that it's actually okay. We can actually have degraded services. Now, when you're talking about somebody making deposits or things like that, they get a bit more antsy about it. But when you're sharing information back out and you're giving a consistent customer experience, it's actually okay. And it allows people to kind of get over some of those cultural hump, some of those workforce challenges that they run into the past. So I'm sharing this with you because it is a significant issue to not just say, oh, pivot to the new and start using all these new things. You have an inertia issue with a lot of environments where you have to go in and really help them understand how it is and how it's okay to begin to embrace things and doing different in different ways. And I'll just close on this and talk a little bit about where many of our organizations that we work with aspire to go to over time, and that's to be much more data-driven. If you've instrumented your systems in the right way, if you've taken advantage of the facilities available to you on AWS or other architectures to start collecting data in new and different ways, you can begin to actually use that and become much more of a data-driven business. So instead of trying to forecast where things are heading, you can actually use real metrics and real results about how your customers, how your employees, how your business partners are using your systems and applications to make them run much better and more efficiently, as well as predict the future as well. And that's what we want. That's what we're trying to achieve when we're pivoting to the new. We're trying to make these businesses much more digitally enabled so that they can work in much faster and more efficient ways and always be ahead of their competitors. So this is what we do when we bring that together. We're reinvigorating these organizations through platforms. Now, I'll be honest, a lot of our clients, they aspire to be what's called a platform business. So platform business is, they kind of want to be the Uber of whatever. And this is a pretty, it's actually, for many of them, I think they resign themselves to the fact that perhaps they'll join a platform and that'll be a good thing for them. But they also aspire to, kind of create network effect or use distribution power law, enter entirely new economies through this type of model. And as they're pivoting to new and transforming their core, that's how they want to really scale and grow their business. Now, part of the recipe for doing that is leveraging a platform itself to actually build their future business on. So by trying to become a platform, they're leveraging a platform actually in doing exactly that. And that's what we're getting at here with being able to reinvigorate an organization to be able to drive new areas of growth and unexpected areas of growth by becoming exactly that, a platform-enabled business, but using a platform to do it. So it gives them great possibilities, though, to be much more adaptive to changing markets, to catapult their workforce into entirely new ways of working. So, one of the things that we've been able to, I think, embrace over time is that it's very possible, to do things like DevOps using waterfall software development techniques, for those that are still familiar with that. But you actually can't really do Agile without DevOps, and we may have a philosophical debate about that later on, but we've got a Q&A time to allow that. But the truth is that unless you start to provide some of those services, and a lot of these, again, are enabled directly on these platforms, it's very difficult for your organizations to begin to embrace or really get into some of these new ways of working. And of course, as you're doing that, you're taking advantage of new levels of global responsiveness because you can actually connect in different ways, and you're minimizing a lot of barriers to innovation. And that's the last thing I really wanted to hit on this, is that as you're working on these platforms, we have a client that I'm working with in the Middle East. It's a big telecom there, and they're starting to look at using virtual agent technology to change the way that they interact with their customers. And this isn't just some simple virtual agent solution. It's something where we're actually training the natural language processing model to understand different Arabic dialects and others. They would have no ability to do some of the advanced things that they're doing unless they had actually taken advantage of moving some of their systems onto, in this case, AWS as well, onto AWS, because now they have native access to the things like Poly and others, which are giving them incredible advances that they wouldn't have had in their older data center. And because it's there and it's easy to tap into, they're using it almost as a platform for innovation. So it's inspiring and kind of creating new ideas and new thoughts in their organization they wouldn't otherwise have. And that's what we're trying to get at here about how organizations, it's not just about pivoting to the new, is that when they've actually done that, they're actually reinvigorating the company itself and driving entirely new areas of growth. So I'll just close on this, and I'm going to invite Tawny up here in just a second about what it means when we're talking about doing platform-led business transformation. You can see some of the things that are involved here. This is relevant really in any industry that we work with. But it's really about kind of reinventing yourself in a way, and kind of thinking about how you serve your customers differently. And we're incredibly proud, of some of the things that we've accomplished in this space. And the one that I really admire is for a utility that we worked with not in the not too distant past, where we helped them tremendously in transforming their core and reducing the costs of operating their legacy, customer billing systems and others. And they took the savings from that and they drove it into pivoting to the new. They embraced new ways of working. They were using cloud native development. And we actually were starting to look at what types of innovative things can they do in their enterprise that were actually totally different. And it's actually one of my favorite kind of combination of pivot to the new and cost savings stories that we've seen. They actually had a set of infrastructure driving something called an OMS. Who knows here what an OMS, by the way, is? Does anybody know what an OMS is in utility? We got one person? All right. It's an outage management system. So you know when you have when your electricity goes out and you have to, sometimes your landline phone, if anybody here still has one, would work and you'd be able to call them. Well, most people go on their mobile phone and actually submit an outage request. This is the system that actually handles that. So normally that type of system, not so busy, right? You might get, if you're a relatively good-sized utility, like you got several million customers as this one did, you might have at any given time, 6,000, 8,000 outages across your service territory. On a busy day, it would be something like that. But you get a storm come through. You have serious issues. You might get 1 million or 2 million customers out all at once. And it actually becomes an extremely busy period. Now, for this particular utility, what they had done is they had actually built in their own data center the infrastructure and the software and everything else that they need to be able to handle basically 1 million customers, 1.5 million customers all being out at once, and pretty much all telling them at once that, hey, we're out. So they had these incredibly erratic service demands that went in there. They spent $2 million a year maintaining the infrastructure alone for this. The storage layers, the backup and fault tolerance and other pieces that were put into place for this. $2 million a year. So we looked at that and said, first of all, we can't move this to cloud. Not possible. We probably could have, but not possible. It doesn't make sense. We actually rewrote major parts, most all of their OMS, in about a 12-week project. And when we finished that, we put it up on AWS, put it live into production. You know how much that OMS instance cost them a year? $11. Okay? It was on Lambda. Cost them $11 a year for the thing. Think about the difference in cost savings and what it is that they've achieved out of that. Now, you won't run into those kind of examples every single day, but if you're talking about a business that's really trying to reinvent itself, they're trying to pivot to the new, and they're trying to transform their core, that's the type of inspiration and change that you want to see. Now, to really bring this to life, and one of the things, this is a recently completed project, the one I just shared with you we did maybe a year or so ago. Tawny Crefeld is going to come up and talk about how this happens in a TV industry. Tawny, come on up.
Thank you.
I almost walked off with it.
So Tawny Crefeld, Managing Director in our Communications, Media, and High Tech practice, and I'm going to give you a little overview of our OpenAP project, which, as Adam said, was part of the trying to change the broadcast television kind of the landscape there. So broadcast television advertising has typically been done just based on age and gender demographics, and that's it. So, I like to say, what does Sarah Palin and Angelina Jolie have in common? Nothing, but they're in the same television demographic, right? So, if you're trying to, and then there's the rise of digital advertising, and it is so much more targeted. They know exactly who you are. Broadcast TV had to start competing against that. And so they put in a bunch of analytics inside their own systems to try to find ways of targeting customers better. But that, what they call advanced advertising or targeted advertising, that targeted advertising process was very slow and very manual. And in the digital advertising, it's much more automated. So they needed to compete both from an automation standpoint as well as just getting more targeted. So the consortium, so there was a consortium founded of Fox, Viacom, and Turner, as you can see there. And they got together and they said, hey, let's get together and let's find a way of standardizing and removing some of the friction from this process so that we can better together compete against digital. So they wanted to create a cloud-based platform, be a platform business, and that platform is really going to be a marketplace between the advertisers and agencies and the broadcasters. At the beginning, it was only just Fox, Viacom, and Turner, but it was intended to be an open marketplace. And since we have gone live with it, but since we went live, NBCU and Univision have also joined the consortium. So it is becoming more of that marketplace. Okay, so great, they wanted to do this. What does that mean? Let's see if I can move this forward. The good thing about the consortium, they were very smart in that they wanted to have a minimal viable product. How many times have we heard minimal viable product and then they start boiling the ocean, right? Every time, right? These guys actually had a very specific criteria for what they wanted to address in their minimal viable product, and they kept to it, which was the only thing that allowed us to launch on time. And part of the reason that they wanted to have a minimal viable product and have it be somewhat targeted was that they wanted to launch on October 1st, which kind of lines up with their broadcast industry timelines. And so they said, we're going live on October 1st. This is what we're going to do. And by the way, that gave us 5 months to do it. So we'll go into that in a second. But they did 3 things. Number 1, build a segment. Share a segment, and then verify the post. Those are the sort of the top 3 things there. And so what that means in sort of, people who aren't in advertising, what that means is, like if I want to build a segment and I want to say, hey, I want to target my advertising for veterans of a certain age, over a certain salary, who, maybe have recently gone on a trip, something, whatever, right? That's the people that they think might buy the truck or might buy whatever. But you can use the platform with a bunch of different data sources that we've got in the platform to create that targeted segment, right? So an advertiser would say, hey, I want my veterans to go buy my trucks, so I want this segment. Second thing is share a segment. The advertisers or agencies can, create that segment, which I kind of think of as a little common communication, right? It's the method of communication, and it's very, very solid. Then they can share it to all the broadcasters. So, now there's 5 on the platform. They can share that same segment to all 5 of the broadcasters, and they have a common language that they can, then each of those broadcasters then says, okay, this is the shows, this is the inventory that I'm going to use to target your veterans. And then the agencies can start seeing, oh, well, Fox is good at this, and Turner's good at that. But it just sort of helps that language, and so that's the sharing. And then the last one is verifying the post. Previous to OpenAP, what was happening was, an advertiser would work directly with Fox, for example, and say, hey, I want to target my veterans. They say, great, here's your shows. There's some sort of guarantee in there. And then Fox afterwards would say, great, I hit all those eyeballs you wanted me to. Good job, me. And the advertiser had no way of verifying that, So, it was the consortium used the term, you're verifying your own homework, and that's the advertisers wanted a third-party neutral way of validating that. So the platform takes the sort of the inventory of the shows where the advertising was run, and then kind of bounces it against all the data and analytics, and kind of creates a post report that shows, what's the total reach that you got matching your demographic. Did you really hit all those veterans or not? So those are the 3 things that we had to create as part of the platform for our minimal viable product. So 5 months. Why 5 months? Well, it was just sort of when they finally decided what they wanted to do. October 1st was looming, and that's what they wanted to do. So we had 5 months to be able to get this launched, and what that meant was, number 1, we had to create, a custom UI, because there's nothing like this in the industry. It's new, right? It's kind of a platform business for that. So we needed to create custom UIs. We needed to create all the APIs, internal to the platform, but they also wanted the APIs to be externalized so that the agencies or other broadcasters could access some of the capabilities of the function. Security was huge. They wanted, because of the fact that this is a marketplace where you've got all these different agencies and all of these different broadcasters, you never want Fox to see Turner data. You never want, the agency representing McDonald's to see the agency representing Burger King's data. Like, it had to be very, very partitioned and secure, and so security was woven in right into the architecture all throughout it. And then this thing had to be ready to run, right? When this thing went live on October 1st, and the consortium was going to make their big announcement of, hey, it's live and, you know, come join it, it had to be running. So we had to have all the monitoring, all the alarming, it had to be ready to perform, stable, all of that stuff. You know, and if it isn't totally obvious by now, the only way we could have done it is by leveraging a lot of the capabilities that AWS gives us. Like, we were able to, you know, as soon as we had at least sort of the mock-ups and the idea of what we needed to have for the UI, you know, the wireframes and all that, we were able to basically just jump straight into development. We had our development environment up. We were going into, you know, we had not just DevOps, we had DevSecOps, so we had our security woven right into our DevOps pipeline. We were able to do, you know, automated testing and do our integration testing as soon as we got, you know, sort of 2 connections of the APIs. We were doing all of that automated. And we leveraged a bunch of the different capabilities of AWS. You know, we had, you know, AWS Gateway, Elastic, I just lost the word, Elasticsearch, Elastic something, S3, Redshift, just a ton of the different things all built in there, and some of them we didn't even know we needed until we hit a problem, and the only way we could solve it was, you know, leveraging another capability from AWS. But because of the speed with which we were able to get started, we were able to get it all done. Now, just as a quick point, I don't recommend 5 months as a baseline for starting your platform business. It's not my recommendation, but we were able to sort of meet the consortium's deadline because of a lot of the capabilities that we were able to leverage from AWS. We actually launched 2 days early, I'm just saying. So, and then, you know, and then since then, of course, the cool thing is we have been able to continue forward. We've done a couple of different feature releases, and then, you know, this was just an MVP, and so they wanted, they're going to kind of continue moving towards a more automated, you know, purchasing, because there's a lot of stuff. You see that from the previous slide that there was a lot of the capabilities that were kind of below the line that we weren't able to do in the initial release. So we're going to continue doing that as we go forward and build it more into that automated platform, again, to compete with digital. The other thing I think that really helped us here, kind of to Adam's point in terms of pivoting to the new, like these guys, it was a consortium, right? And what that means is it's like a legal document on a piece of paper. There was no infrastructure. There's no legacy anything, right? We had nothing, and so this really was a platform kind of out of thin air or out of the cloud. But it helped us in a way because we weren't tied to, you know, the ops guys saying this or whatever. We were able to sort of, we were able to say what our you know, best practices and what we recommended should be done, and we were able to drive a lot of things the way we wanted to because we were able to do it actually in an Accenture location and leveraging all the cloud, and just kind of did it our own way, which I think is not a situation that we often find ourselves in as consultants, but which in this case was really huge to enable us to get the speed that we needed to get it launched for the consortium. So that's it. So I guess we can take any questions.
Cool. Questions?
Yes.
Did you have any lessons learned after the...
Yeah, there's a mic over yeah.
I forgot about the mics.
You know, given the fact that it was such an accelerated timeline and you were able to, you know, achieve the final goal and the deadline, what were some lessons learned over that time frame?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was kind of all a blur, but I guess the things I think that really enabled us to be effective were, you know, number one, in everything that we did, we made sure we did the hardest parts first, And I've heard some people, as they go into Agile, they sort of start small and then kind of build up. We did the hardest parts first, and that way we knew, kind of how much time left we had. Number two, we were sort of always looking the next step ahead. So we had we were trying to figure out our alarming and our monitoring when we were still just in a couple sprints in dev. And then I think the other thing is we made sure we took the time to do things properly. Like I said, we wove security right into the architecture. We did all of that automated testing and stuff right up front. Lots of times on programs, you sort of just get to development and you're like, I'll get to the automating that later, I'll automate it later. But it makes it so much better when you can just sort of kick off your test cycle and get that done and not have to worry about it. So I think we did a lot of things, we took the time to do things the right way so that we could really speed up the overall process. And I think that was probably my biggest lesson learned there.
So I'll add two things. Like in the project, accelerated timeline projects like this, I find that there's two key ingredients for success that kind of seem like they're common threads here. One is for a project like this, especially where the use of the platform's new, getting some help from AWS themselves and having AWS professional services is actually a really good thing. They will help you make sure that the products are used in the right way. They can be an effective channel into support when you really do need or find something that's not quite working the way you expect it to. Often it's working correctly, it's just not working the way you expect it to. They're actually, it's actually a very valuable part of that. As Accenture, we're humble enough to know that having AWS working with us and a client is a great way to solve some of those problems, and it works really well. So that's one thing that's really important. The other is to instrument everything. Debugging this type of architecture and platform is really hard, and you're always constantly amazed about the value of the data that you can collect off of these platforms. They can help you tremendously if something's not working correctly, but also to provide like the data-driven insights I was talking about earlier. So instrument everything and use AWS ProServe along with you to help deliver these projects, I think, are a couple of key ingredients I've seen. All right, anyone else? Got one more? Okay.
In the post-verification stage, what method or tools did you use to get feedback from,
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we did was, the broadcasters themselves would provide a report which really just says, here's the inventory of the shows or whatever that that they did the advertising on. And then we would take that into the platform, and there's different data sources that are used. There's actually Nielsen data, ComScore data, so it's, you guys have all heard of like Nielsen TV ratings. It's that kind of data that we're using in the platform as the analytics engine. And so, they'd say, hey, you saw all these shows, and Nielsen is basically saying, hey, X amount of veterans watched that show or whatever. So that's really where that kind of data connection comes from.
Was the Nielsen data, does it integrate directly with your AWS workflow, or do you have to import it? There's an agreement with them and all that, so we have APIs and it's ingested, and it's it's basically part of our platform. So like when you're creating a targeted advertising segment, you're actually leveraging all the different data types that Nielsen provides, or there's another data provider, ComScore. You can use all of their stuff too. So like Polk Auto is in there. So it depends on what data source you're choosing, but then we use that same data source to validate, did they hit that advertising, did they hit that reach or not? Okay, thank you.
Cool, thanks. Anyone else?
Yeah, just one quick one.
Sure.
So with it being a new platform, short timeline, how did you look at kind of ramping team size? So, how big was the team, and were there considerations about, speed versus growth of the number of heads there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I kind of bucketed into a couple of different areas, right? I had kind of what I thought of as the functional team, which was the UI, the API, and the analytics, like that layer of it. And then there was really the technical team, which was putting together more of like the AWS and the security and the infrastructure and how that all ties together. And so, I put on, strong leads on each of those areas. And we tried to keep the team pretty small. It was probably, 20, 25 onshore, something like that, and about 15, 20 offshore. I don't know the exact numbers, but something like that. So we tried to keep it small. And then I just had my fingers on everything and everyone, and we just kind of managed it that way. And then there were times when I would say, okay, well, we're not really scheduled to bring on the training person until this date, but I just knew it needed to be done, and I just make sort of game time decisions and bring people on as needed, and it worked. So I don't know. It's a lot of gut feel and kind of knowing what's, we really did, I think, honestly, back to your question, one of the other things I think that we had more than anything else was we just had sort of blind faith that we could make it work. Like, we knew it had to be done by that day. Like, it has all been publicly announced ahead of time. Like, it was publicly announced ahead of time that we were doing this for the consortium. We actually had, at the 4-month point, we had a beta day at Paramount Studios in Los Angeles, where they brought in all the industry experts to do a hands-on demo and touch and feel, and so even the 5 months was like forever away. We were really looking at the 4 months. And so, but there was just like a blind faith that we could get this done. And so, I had a lot of support from my leadership that if I just needed somebody else, I just grabbed them and brought them on. So we don't always have that luxury, but I did in this case.
I seem to remember some escalations to my team to get a few extra people.
Yeah.
What was the overall size of the team and the makeup that
Yeah, around like 25-ish onshore and 20-ish offshore, something like that. We were all located in New York City, mostly co-located. Again, and that's probably another lesson learned, is just really, as much as we love to say that we can all work as well in a virtual world as not, really having everybody co-located to the extent possible was really valuable.
I think that's a key thing for starting up a new platform. I think once you get to maybe MVP plus 2 or 3 releases, then moving to maybe a more distributed team structure works better. But you're absolutely right. Having the team together for those first couple of releases is super important.
Huge.
Good. Another one.
Yeah. How does the consortium measure the success of the platform? And do you have any ownership in the success overall?
It's a great question, and I'm not going to give you a satisfactory answer, I'm guessing. So number one, one of the consortium's goals was to get additional broadcasters on, and that was successful. I said we've got NBCU and Univision on, and they're talking to other broadcasters so that it can, again, become that marketplace. So that was kind of one measure of success. Their other measure of success, really, which is the only one that really matters, is how much targeted advertising and that kind of advertising revenue is flowing to them because of this platform. And that's something that we, Accenture, we don't have visibility to that. That's something that they kind of own themselves. And there's a lot of sort of lines where, we have all this data in our system and we won't, there's things that they pay us to not give them access to it, right? So that Turner never knows how many segments Fox is working on or whatever. So we stay a little bit neutral and blind on that stuff. So for us, the biggest kind of success is really, is it being used? Are there advertising agencies on it that are using it? And we do have those kinds of numbers, but how it translates in terms of dollars and all that stuff, we definitely don't have that information. So, but,
And they wouldn't want us to have it.
And
either.
they wouldn't want us to.
They wouldn't want us to have it. Excellent. Anyone else? Got one more? Okay.
So you mentioned that this was I think you said Greenfield, brand new thing. If you were considering trying to change an existing piece of software or something like that, would you consider approaching it in the same way, only writing it differently, or what sorts of things might you consider if you want to even consider that? If I can
I
say
can
that.
probably take that one, yeah. So that's probably a question that happens more frequently than the Greenfield scenario. It's a the best way to answer that question is you have to understand the legacy application really well, right? And can it actually be moved into this target environment and really become, something that can take advantage of that platform? And if you remember the example I was giving about the outage management system, the reason we said that we couldn't move that particular application is because it had a lot of underlying communications that were dependent upon like C libraries that interface directly with the hardware. You're not going to get that kind of stuff on AWS, right? Instead, you're using simple messaging services and other things to be able to accomplish some of the things that this did natively on the hardware. So understanding the application really well is important. I also would tell you, you got to know like what operating system dependencies you might have and the language, of course, that you're on. There's a philosophy that I've kind of embraced over time, and this is a cloud migration philosophy of moving applications into there. And you'll hear people talk about lift and shift. I've probably overseen movement of, I don't know, 30,000 applications now in a cloud, somewhere like that. I've yet to see one that doesn't require some type of change when you move it. So I don't think there is such a thing as lift and shift. If somebody can tell me that there is and I'm wrong, I'd love to understand what you've been able to do. So you're always going to find yourself having to make some changes. But in some cases, you really it's minimal and it's pretty easy to get done. The truth is, though, if you want to do something like what Tani's describing here, where you're really taking advantage of cloud native services, you're going to use things like Lambda or Aurora and other pieces. You're talking about doing major surgery on an application, and you really kind of have to look at yourself and say, would it just be easier for us to rewrite this application? And there's some great stuff that you can use nowadays. We use discovery tools in Accenture quite a bit that allow us to extract rules and logic from source code, and we can do it across 40, 50 different languages and use that as a great starting point. It actually can really accelerate development when you have scenarios like that. And frankly, that oftentimes if it's a core part of the business, and you're really trying to do something with it that will propel your growth, rewriting it can often be the right answer. For other applications that are a bit more routine, just doing the remediation on them and moving them is typically a better example. So, I'm a good consultant, and I'll say it depends. But we've, having done the number of applications that we have at this point, we've got a pretty good methodology that helps us figure out, exactly what the right answer is for different legacy applications, about whether you remediate them, replace them, rewrite them, etc. Okay, anyone else? Awesome, you guys have been a great audience. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tani.